So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this is on a map called the Borderlands, and this is one that I have played on before, but unfortunately all the battles that I've played on this map before have been relatively one-sided and I haven't really been able to show them, so hopefully this one will be slightly different. And this is also a slightly shorter battle in nature. This is 16,000 frames, which for a 4v4 on a map like this is actually very quick indeed. So at the very least we're going to be getting down to business right away. There's going to be no holding back from anyone, I think. And this is partly because, I'm not sure if you can hear it in my voice, but I am getting a cold, and that means that my voice is going to abandon me quite quickly. So I'm trying to sort of ration the lifespan of my voice over the entire week so that I can keep making content at the very least. We'll see how that goes. I mean, I will do one large siege at some point during my recording time this week, and I hope that my voice is able to hold it, but I'm not going to do that right from the start because otherwise I could end up completely ruining it and then I wouldn't be able to make any more, so I'll try and save that to the end if I can. Nonetheless, this is quite an interesting battle. Now, based on the length of it, I don't think we're actually going to be seeing the two settlements that are on either side of it, over here and over here. Excuse me. But we shall see how this goes, because this is a battle that you can use terrain to your advantage on, so it's not just going to be an open field slaughterhouse, and it is going to be a very large mix of different factions. And we'll start off with the blue team and the player who sent me this battle replay, which is going to be the Steward of Dale, and he is going to be playing as Mirkwood today. So Mirkwood, of course, one of the factions in the game which certainly has a big emphasis on archers, so I would imagine he doesn't really have to worry too much. I mean, he is going up against Imladris, and of course, you know, as elves, Imladris do have decent archers, but they don't have as big a focus on them as Mirkwood. And the Hiri Peng, the slightly heavier variant of Mirkwood archers, are also here on the front line, so they'll be able to withstand a little bit more arrow fire themselves. In the middle, we also have the Wardens of Amon Lank, which are a very good choice against Imladris, not only because they can hide and also they have very good missile damage indeed, they're fantastic archers, but also in melee they combine having the AP that a big two-handed axe grants you with having some of that elven skill, so they could be a pretty decent unit to use in melee against some of the more defensive Imladris infantry units like the Imladris Guardians or the Elder Enway Spearmen. I still wouldn't back them against something like the Elder Enway Swordmasters, though I think they are just a stretch too far with their really high base damage and skill. Then we have another unit of Hiri Peng, so certainly from an archery perspective they have got their bases covered. Just in behind them we have some Spears of Emondwe, a relatively basic spear unit, not a lot of armour, but as most elven units of this type have, they do have some very good melee defense, and of course as spears they're certainly just going to be here to try and prevent any Imladris cavalry from charging right into the front of the Mirkwood line. Mirkwood do have quite a lot of decent anti-cavalry options, both on foot, they have a lot of spears which they can bring, but also on their mounted units, which we will get into in just a moment, because certainly Mirkwood's cavalry is very difficult to fight horseback to horseback. Then we have some Hiri Alth, so the stronger unit of line infantry that Mirkwood can field. They do not have their armour upgrade this time, but that's not necessarily needed for them to be really, really good. They're a very strong unit of line infantry. They're not quite as good as the Imladris Guardians, especially not when the Guardians have their armour upgrade as well. But they're not far behind, honestly. Like, the elven factions just in general are able to field some really, really strong line infantry. Not necessarily the most numerous as you would expect, but individually they're very strong. So neither Mirkwood nor Imladris are going to be able to lay down too much of an advantage in terms of quality in this particular fight. Imladris probably want to get into Mirkwood's face very quickly to try and make it all about their strength in melee, I would imagine. Whereas Mirkwood going to have to try and pick the engagement a little bit more carefully, but at the very least Mirkwood can withstand an Imladris push like this with quality units like the Hiri Alth. We also have a couple of units of Elder Council back here, which are a good choice as well. They're really good at zoning out cavalry, which of course Imladris can bring some really nasty cavalry, javelin, spear hybrids, but also for dealing with the Imladris infantry, if you can get them into the side of the front line, they can really do some nice damage, and then of course they can be used as makeshift infantry as well. As far as the mounted units go, we do have some Bows of Emondwe, which are of course really, really strong horse archers, although unlike the Imladris equivalent of horse archers, they do have pretty low armour. So while they're really, really good at dealing damage as far as horse archers go, they are very easy to zone out as well. They are quite fragile, but we shall see how Mirkwood utilise this unit, because it does give them more mobility on the battlefield. More Bows of Emondwe on the other side. But they also have the Sindar of the Girdle. Now, the Sindar of the Girdle, I've mentioned before, are really strong in 0.97, and most of that comes down to the fact that they are incredibly difficult to kill in melee. They have a really high melee defense, as you would expect from a Mirkwood unit like this, as well as having a really nasty charge and a nasty anti-cavalry bonus. They have pretty much They are the best of both worlds when it comes to lance and melee cavalry. They are pretty much the ultimate form of spear cavalry in the game at the moment. I think, again, when the hotfix does eventually come out, I think the idea is to make the Sindar of the Girdle a little bit more focused around their charge, so they're going to be moved a little bit closer to sort of standard lance knights in nature, but for the time being they are really difficult to kill. Even the Gwythi Rockdor would probably think twice before getting involved in a one-on-one melee battle with the Sindar of the Girdle, just because of that melee defense. They're so hard to hit that even sometimes spears can find it quite difficult to hit them in melee. Like, they will of course die to spears, but not as quickly as you might expect. Now, the downside to all of this, if there is a downside to the Sindar of the Girdle, is the fact that their armour is relatively low for the kind of unit that they are, and they don't have a shield, so as soon as that hit, their multiple HP has been expended, the Sindar of the Girdle are quite fragile to archers. But of course Merc would have got other ways to deal with archers, and then there are of course some Ents as well, crouched down in the trees back here, the real powerhouse in the Mirkwood line. Imladris definitely have the strength to deal with the Ents in melee, but it's still a potential problem if they start running around the back lines. Then we shall move on to Mordor, played by Death Eater. He's got some Melkor's Chosen at the back here, which is going to be the General's Bodyguard. Speaking of cavalry that's really strong in melee against other cavalry, the Melkor's Chosen, in terms of damage, are second only, I believe, to the Champions of the White Hand from Isengard. But of course they do have better defensive values, including I think slightly higher armour, but also the shield is very significant as well, because it means of course they can withstand arrow fire over a longer period of time. It's not a huge shield value by any means, but it is still significant. Very, very strong in melee against other cavalry indeed. Olag High as well, very much like the Ents, only I think the Ents are actually a little stronger than the Olag High, but the Olag High have got that armour, which is very nice of course. They can start crashing their way through the lines as well. Lindon, another High Elven faction that Mordor are up against as well, so some Orc fodder, some Orc archers. Now the fodder of course is just here because they're free, but the Orc archers are a good choice actually against Lindon, I think. Very cheap, of course. Cheap archers can be made to work still against Lindon because of their low armour, of course. And I think that the Orc archers should find themselves in a good engagement here. As long, you know, they will lose eventually to any sort of Lindon archers, but you know, overall the cost efficiency there should go in favour of Mordor. Mordor could rush Lindon, but I think with the composition they have, I don't think that's too advisable. They have a front line of Moran on guard and Moran on halberd, so a lot of spears and halberdiers. The armour piercing won't be all that impressive, and they could be outranged by a lot of Lindon's pikes, but it's probably the best that Mordor can do in terms of a front line against someone like Lindon. Certainly in terms of a front line engagement, Lindon have got a lot of advantages over Mordor. We have some Orc javelins, cheap, very effective. Again, the AP is not necessarily going to be that great against Lindon, but the damage will be, and they're obviously very cheap as far as javelins go. Some more Moran on guard back here, as well as some more Sauron's Will. So Death Eater has gone for quite a few armour piercing units, which is not necessarily the most efficient thing to do against Lindon, but perhaps he can get some assistance from his allies as well to put some pressure on Lindon from afar. He does also have the trolls in the form of the mountain trolls and the Olag High. He has some Temple Inquisitors as well, so yet more really, really strong melee cavalry. So Lindon, if they've brought any cavalry, might be in a little bit of trouble. And the Temple Guard, of course, again, the AP not necessarily all that impressive, but the damage will be. Then we have another Wood Elven faction in the shape of Lothlorien, the Mark of the Knight. More Elder Council, so again the Javelin Spear hybrids that we've seen before. Lorien armed archers. Like, it is my opinion that Lorien are the strongest archer-based faction in the game at this point in time, more so than Mirkwood, just because they have more tools at the higher end. Their lower end archers are much of a muchness, really. You know, they tend to cancel one another out, like the March Wardens of the Wood. Well, yeah, they've got poison arrows, so maybe you can even say they're a little bit ahead of the Woodland Realm Patrol. But it's still very close between them at the lower end, but it's really at the higher end where Lorien, I should say, really gain a bit of an advantage. The Lorien armed archers, of course, heavy archers, also slightly higher armour, I think, than the Hiri Peng, which is another small way in which Lorien can flex their muscles on their Wood Elven cousins. Some Elder Council over here. They're going up against Gondor, to be fair, which is not brilliant for Lothlorien. Gondor can absorb quite a lot of arrow fire, even against an arch faction as deadly as Lothlorien. Lorenan spears and sword masses on the flank here. Just in behind we've got some Lorenan axemen, which, to be fair, Lorien's infantry should be able to outdamage most of the standard Gondorian infantry relatively easily. Kindred of Celeborn and Watchers of the Goldenwood, these are obviously the two really high-end archers Lorien have. Fantastic in melee, devastating at range as well. We'll see how well they can do. And also the horseback variant, the Riders of the Golden Wood. So certainly Lorien, somewhat predictably, are going quite heavily into their archers, but I mean, how I would deal with this against Lothlorien would be to be aggressive, but of course that necessitates your allies also being aggressive, because otherwise you can find yourself getting sideswiped by the flanking armies on the other team. Then finally we have Corrigan. It's been a while since I've seen Corrigan actually, and he's going to be playing as Rune. So he's got some Eastron Hunters, we've got some Variag Mercenaries and more Eastron Hunters, so unsurprisingly I'm well aware of how Corrigan likes to play the game, and going for quite a lot of skirmishes to wear down the opposition is definitely the order of the day here. A lot of these lower end skirmishes, and then just in behind we start to have the layers that Corrigan is well known for. Some Scion Rim, some Flag Rim, not a lot of units that can hide here though. Definitely goes for numbers heavy approaches I think Corrigan, but Rune are a little bit more of a balanced faction. So we'll see if this works out here. Eastron Crossbowmen on both sides, as well as some Baltroth Tribesmen, the mighty Dragon's Breath Flame Cannon as well, which could be a real problem for Isengard across the way, we shall see. Camel's Dragon Knights, obviously devastating unit of cavalry. Gamperim all across the back line, and that's just about it. There may be a unit of Hidden Rangers or so back here as well. So let's see how Isengard have set up against Rune. So they're going to have to deal with the Flame Cannon almost immediately. That's 3 units of Uruk-hai archers to be fair, so we could see a really elongated skirmish fight over here between 2 archer forces, which are not brilliant, although Rune with their 4 archers and some of them being shielded should win that, so I'm not sure whether the Uruk-hai archers will prove to be a good move. Both of them have got their really scary siege as well. The Isengard Ballista is here, but I think the Dragon's Breath is already firing at it, which bodes ill for Katunka. He's got some Nazkai and some crossbows, which to be fair are going to be very useful against the runic infantry. Some Warg Riders as well. Some Uruk-hai infantry back here as well, which the Flag Rim are AP, so that probably does give them a bit of a leg up on the Uruk-hai infantry, to be fair, but they will at least hold. More Uruk-hai infantry, some pikes, which are probably the one area so far in which I would say Isengard have got a really genuine advantage over the runic composition. If the pikes can get into position, the runic infantry will really struggle to get through the front of them, and of course the crossbows being slightly better than the Eastron variant, and then some more Warg Riders, but I think Rune are probably starting off in an advantageous position there. Meanwhile Gondor, got some Gondor cavalry here on the side, unupgraded, but still spear cavalry could be used across the battlefield to good effect. Pretty fragile though. We have some Gondor Spearmen over on this side, upgraded. They've got some Fountain Guard in there as well, a very deadly looking phalanx indeed. Gondor Spearmen combined with Fountain Guard. Guards of Osgiliath combined with Gondor Militia Infantry, so perhaps a slightly weaker section of the line here. Some civilians back there, some Axemen of Lasarnak, so the AP is going to be brought to the field by Gondor here. Not completely wasted against Lothlorien, but the skill of the Axemen will be found wanting against the Elven Infantry. Pelagia Marines. We also have a Trebuchet crew here, as well as some Nimlothian Honor Guard. I wonder if the Gondorian Trebuchet crew count as spearmen based on how they look. It would be good. It would be cool if they did, because I did hear about part of 0.97 was going to be to try and make the artillery crews a little bit more useful. But I'm not sure whether that could just be cosmetic. I'm not sure. Mithrandir's retinue, multiple HP bodyguard, very very tanky indeed. Linden facing off against Mordor. Let's see what they have in store. We have some Forlinden archers already opening up on the Mordor lines. Forlinden pikemen just in behind them. They really need to keep out of way of archer fire as per normal. Noldorin Guard and Blade Masters forming up another line back here. This is something Mordor will really struggle to deal with. They really have no answer in their composition today to answer the quality of these Linden units if it comes down to a melee brawl, especially not if they're backing up the pikes. So it'll be interesting to see how Death Eater approaches this. Mithlon Swordmaster as well, just really pouring salt into the wound, as well as the Harlinden infantry here. Definitely all the advantages of melee going to Linden this time around. Mithlon Lancers and Harlinden Riders back here to give them a bit of mobility as well. So I think Linden are in a good position here. Mordor are going to have to be quite careful with how they choose to engage here. And then finally we have Imladris, who are going up against Mirkwood, of course. Eldarenway Spearmen, as well as some upgraded Imladris Guardians. So I think rather unsurprisingly, Imladris are going to have the slight advantage here in melee. They also have a couple of units of Eldarenway, well, one unit of Eldarenway Archers, some Eldarenway Swordmasters, some Gwaithir Myrdain, the AP not going to be terribly useful to be honest. Some cavalry out here on the flank, some Riders of the Bruinen, and the Gwaithir Rockdor, as well as the Eldarenway Lance on the other side. A decent composition I would say to go up against this Mirkwood army. The main problem may be leaving it too long to engage, because they definitely don't have much in the way of archers. If they stay at range of Mirkwood for too long, Mirkwood are going to be able to whittle them down enough to the point where Mirkwood will be able to relatively comfortably deal with the Imladris infantry. But we shall see. Without further ado, let us begin. And the first thing I think I'm going to see is whether or not the Runic Flame Cannon can get some decent hits off onto the Isengard position. Obviously there's a lot of shots that they could make, but Corrigan does need to be quite careful here, because the Flame Cannon does not discriminate. If you've got units right in front of it, it'll rip through your own lines. And Flag Rim are going to be quite important to Rune's cause here, because that AP will be very, very useful against the Uruk-hai companies that Rune is going to be facing off against. And Corrigan doesn't have an aggressive bone in his body, so I think it's relatively safe to say that Rune will not be the ones to take the front foot here. But Isengard don't need to be overtly aggressive either. Meanwhile, the Trebuchet is actually the first thing to start firing, and it's actually going for the Mordor army. Ooh. You can see there that that was the runic flame cannon ripping through the Uruk-hai infantry, but not too devastating. It's quite difficult to deal with the flame cannon when it's in this particular position. Having to deal with it ripping through the entirety of your army can be quite disheartening. But I think Katunka should be just fine. Well, yeah, see, this is the issue with it at the moment. The fact that the projectile is quite thick, and that means that even when you're in loose formation, it can still be pretty devastating. Meanwhile, this actually surprises me, because you can see that Mirkwood are the ones taking the front foot, which I'm in favour of. I'm always in favour of being aggressive, and the Steward of Dale is really taking the fight to M1 breakout here in Mladris. I'm pretty sure that they probably weren't expecting this. In fact, I think we need to actually go down to half speed. It's been a while since I've used the half speed functionality. But interestingly enough, you can see that Lyndon, I think, seeing the danger which is engulfing their ally, is going to send over some support to help them. And this is where Mirkwood could come unstuck, because Mordor can't really afford to be too aggressive against Lyndon, I don't think, because I really don't think Mordor's infantry is up to the task of dealing with the quality that Lyndon have brought. But Mordor may not have a choice here. Mirkwood have really taken the initiative here and charged into Imladris. I thought it would be the other way around based on the compositions and how Mirkwood had more in the way of archers, but now Mirkwood have been able to dictate the shape of the front line, which means that their archers should actually be in a good position to continue to fight. The Hiri Out and the Spears of Amangui are combining their forces to try and deal with the Imladris Guardians. Imladris, they do have the quality advantage in melee unit to unit, but their army is smaller here than Mirkwood. You can see here the Eldarenway Spearmen also matched up against the Hiri Out. Spears against line infantry is usually going to go in favour of the line infantry, where the quality level is similar. As strong as the Eldarenway Spearmen are, it's still going to be difficult for them. Meanwhile, the Sindar of the Girdle continuing to push back against the Imladris cavalry, but the Riders of the Broinen are spear cab in melee, I believe, and combined with the Gwythi Rockdor, even the mighty Sindar of the Girdle are going to struggle in this particular engagement. But Mirkwood have been aggressive, and they need to keep up the pressure here. If they can seize the momentum and just continue to push forward, everything should be good for them. Meanwhile, Mordor are moving forward, albeit slowly, so this will put pressure on Lyndon. You can see here that the Mithrandir's retinue are also coming across. The Harlingen Riders did charge into the back of this Mirkwood skirmish line, but the Harlingen Riders struggling to well, you can see the Eldarenway Lancers. Mirkwood, this is starting to become a little bit of a problem, but the Melkor's chosen to coming in to save the day. And with the Ents in there, Mirkwood, all they need to do is make sure their backline's not overly exposed. And they started off quite well against Imladris. Imladris will be able to hold on for quite a long time, even if they've been caught off guard. The quality of Imladris will be enough to make life a little bit more difficult for them. Mordor have moved their way into position. This is where I do worry for them, though. But to be fair, I think Bloodbath McGrath over here has probably... Well, no, he's got his Noldorin Guard in there. He does need to get his pikemen into melee, though, because they are getting shot by the Orc Archers. And the pikes will be the ideal counter to the Morannon Halberds here on the front line. It'll take away any hope Mordor had of being able to use a phalanx to just bog Lyndon down for as long a period as possible. But with units like the Noldorin Guard on the front line, it's going to be really difficult for them. Noldorin Blade Master especially will rip through anything Mordor have in melee, except for maybe the Temple Guard, but they would still lose. They would just be able to put up more of a fight. Riders of the Goldenwood are cycling over, which is good to see. Lorien can't really use their cavalry in a narrow engagement like this against Gondor anyway, so to see that support go over to try and help Mirkwood in their aggressive actions is good to see. Meanwhile over here, unsurprising as well to see the fact that Isengard and Rune are still just sort of having a staring contest with one another. I don't blame either side for really doing that. Rune have got the ranged advantage, they should definitely leverage it, but Isengard can't afford to charge in all on their lonesome, because they could, I don't know if they would get any support from Gondor, which I think would be necessary to really hammer home any sort of advantage. Over here, meanwhile, there are some Warns of Amon Lank now moving forwards to try and help shore up the front line. The Eldarenway Lancers are in and amongst things over here, but I think this may be the end of them. There are still some Eldarenway Spearmen and some Imladris Guardians in here, but they're being overrun here, and I have to say, Mirkwood's very quick and decisive charge has definitely served them well here. You can see that the Ents are still going along. The Eldarenway Swordmasters and the Gwythi Myrdain, however, those are two units which should be able to deal with the Ents fairly comfortably, to be honest with you, if they are allowed to continue to attack them in melee. But with the Melkor's chosen charging in, they may be taking casualties to the point where they will no longer be able to deal with the Ents. And that would be a real body blow for Imladris. I mean, Imladris are definitely hanging on more than anything else here. I think they need... Attacking into an army of Imladris' quality here is always going to be costly for Mirkwood, though. So what Imladris can do, I think they will go on to lose this fight over the long haul, but what Imladris can do is just make Mirkwood pay for it as much as possible and hope that their allies can make something happen on the other side. Because again, I don't think that the Imladris player necessarily did anything wrong here. I just need to credit the Mirkwood player for being aggressive and really forcing the hand of the Imladris army quickly. And it may be that Mirkwood saw how small the Imladris army was and thought, I can take that on. They've gone too quality heavy and I can envelop their entire army. And so far that has proven to be the case. The Mythalon Lancers are coming in, Javelin and Lance Cavalry hybrids, but going into the Melkor's Chosen is a big risk for them. The Melkor's Chosen will dumpster them in melee. They're much more happy at dealing damage than they are going toe-to-toe with other cavalry units. Here, Peng. You can see here actually the Riders of the Goldenwood, I think they are going to help out the Mordor forces, which would actually be fantastic for them. The Wardens of Alos Tyrion have revealed themselves, but the Riders of the Goldenwood could shoot right up the Linden line here, and that could be devastating for them. The Olag High over here are actually making it so Mordor are winning this frontline engagement, even with the Noldorin Guard and the Noldorin Blade Masters there. I think when the Blade Masters start getting towards the front against the Olag High, that will change. Axemen of Lasarnak are coming in. I think Gondor sees the fact that Linden are actually starting to struggle. So the Trebuchet, yeah, you can see here that this is really bad for Linden. A unit like the Riders of the Goldenwood shooting right up your line is pretty much death. So the Axemen of Lasarnak are coming in, but I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of routing going on from Mordor thanks to the Trebuchet hits. And you can see already, really, there is an awful lot of chaos erupting on the field. It's a good thing we are going at half speed. Temple Inquisitors charging in. 4 Linden Marines here. Their spears and melee, of course, but as long as they're not using their javelins, that will be considered a victory for Mordor. As the Mountain Trolls continue to try and squash them down in melee. The Temple Inquisitors are in behind the lines. The Axemen of Lasarnak are trying to shore up the Linden front line, and this part of the Linden front line is winning. There goes Thranduil. So not all is lost for Linden. They are winning on this side, certainly, and you know, the more readily available support from Gondor has certainly helped them there. But the problem for Gondor is Lothlorien. They can't afford to send everything over here, because if they do, they'll be taking hits from everything in the Lothlorien skirmish line as they continue to do that. Yeah. Those Orc Archers are still firing away, and they've certainly played their part as well, because I think most of the Linden Archers have actually been forced to attack the infantry, so the Orc Archers have mostly been free to just poke and prod at the Linden forces, which is going to be a good thing for them. Mirkwood continuing to push forward. Oh, excuse me. At this point they are shaken though, and the Gwaithir Myrdain, 42 strong, they have now managed to cut down the Ents, and even with a unit like the Wardens of Amon Lank here, it goes to show how tough the Gwaithir Myrdain and the Elder Runway Swordmasters truly are. You know, the pride and joy really of the Imladris infantry force, these two units. Absolutely devastating in terms of their attack stats, and Mirkwood are struggling to finish them off here. And that could be the issue. Mirkwood have started off really strongly here, but it could be they really don't have the ability to completely finish Imladris off. And you can see here with the Mithrandir's retinue and Gwaithir Rokdor in behind the lines, that could be a really bad thing here. Eldoranway Lance as well for Mirkwood. Like, Mirkwood are winning, but do they have the ability to finish off a unit of Eldoranway Archers once they push their way through here? Because this unit of Hiriaut is about to get charged by the Mithrandir's retinue. The Gwaithir Rokdor are also here. So Imladris clinging on for dear life. Now Mirkwood do still have some archers in the backfield, the Hiri Peng. There are some Imladris Guardians in behind the line. So I think actually, you know, Mirkwood and Imladris have probably fought one another to the death, which is unfortunate for them. But the decisive action that Mirkwood has taken here has definitely sparked this fight into life. Mirkwood do have a pretty significant victory here though. Going to push into the backfield, but again the Eldoranway Archers are no slouches in melee, and with cavalry support, I'm not sure. I mean, whoever wins this fight, whichever of the two armies goes on to win this fight, they're going to be in very, very battered shape afterwards. Here though you can see the Noldorin Blade Masters have managed to carve their way through the Mordor line as expected. Mordor, even with the support of all of those archers and the Riders of the Goldenwood, the quality of Linden was still just about able to push them through. Linden though, their infantry has taken far more losses than they would have liked against a relatively weak Mordor front line. You know, Mordor definitely spent their money in other places, and that has proven to be a good decision from Death Eater, and the support that he got from that Lothlorien unit of horse archers, as well as the Mirkwood archers. Well, I did notice that the Hiri Peng had turned around and was starting to shoot through the Wardens of Elos Tyrion. Gondor has probably sent over more infantry over here than they would have liked as well. I think it's about time we went up to regular speed as well. Oh, excuse me. Axemen of Lasarnak coming in here finally, dealing with the mountain trolls. That's going to be a very one-sided fight indeed, but the Axemen of Lasarnak, even with their armour upgrades, are getting showered with javelins as well. The Orc javelins doing their thing. A very infamous unit indeed, but Lyndon is starting to push through. The Orc archers now, pretty much the last front line that Mordor can put on is their Orc archers, which means Mordor's infantry is almost certainly completely falling to pieces. They really don't have anything that can deal with the Noldorin units after all. But a large part of that is the fact that the Gondorians did send over some pretty significant support, almost all of their Axemen of the Sarnak. But of course the upshot to that is Gondor were free to do that because Lothlorien's army was so archer-centric, and they do still have a lot of it in reserve, to be fair. The Dragon's Breath cannon has moved across. I think they're going to be going after the Gondorian army as well. Indeed they are. I can see it streaking through the air. Going after the cavalry. I don't know. I don't think the cavalry is really all that much of a concern, to be honest with you. Over here, meanwhile, a very long ground war between Isengard and Rune, but this is one that Rune will win. They simply have more archers than Isengard, and the Variac mercenaries with their shields as well are much more suited for that kind of warfare through the Warg Riders again. So again, the red team, it's a good thing that Lyndon have ultimately managed to turn this fight in their favour, because the red team need something to hold on to here. The Noldorin Guard are moving across, and they are systematically destroying Mordor. To be fair to Mordor though, they did a really good job with the army that they had. Like, I looked at it and I really worried for them, because when things got into melee, Lyndon were always going to have an absolutely enormous advantage over them. But they've managed to make Lyndon pay for it more than they otherwise would have, and they forced Gondor to send over perhaps more support than they were initially planning. We'll see if that has any bearing in the late game. Imladris, meanwhile, I think they've won this fight, You can see that, the cavalry, the fact that their cavalry was able to carry the day, the support from the Mithrandir's retinue as well, very key. And the Lyndon cavalry, of course, which ultimately ended up falling as well. Axemen of Lasarnak coming over here, so good teamwork actually. They really Imladris managed to hold on long enough for support to come over here, and ultimately that's proven to be very key indeed. I got to give Mirkwood a lot of credit for being really aggressive. But in the end, if that was going to be the case, I think they probably would have benefited from, instead of the bows of Emenduir, I think maybe a unit of Huntsmen of Amon Lank would have made the difference there, because then they would have been able to, the Sindar of the Girdle and the Huntsmen would then have been able to go toe-to-toe with the entirety of the Imladris cavalry force, whereas as it was, the fact that they still had that cavalry buzzing around in the backlines, I think was what ultimately saved Imladris here and led to their victory. But Imladris are very depleted at this point. They are, their cavalry could still be very useful, don't get me wrong. And what infantry they do have will be very important, but Imladris and Lyndon have been able to pull out narrow victories. But we shall see now what Lothlorien are made of, because Lothlorien are now being converged on by two sides. Gondor, by far and away, are the part of the army that they need to focus on the most, and indeed most of their archers are doing so. Silverthorn arrows firing in, all of those split-shot arrows as well, so it's going to be a really, really torrid time for Gondor on the advance. But as soon as they do get closer to melee, their numbers will be very, very important here. They're going to need to rely on their numbers, because units like Lorenar Axemen are going to be very, very difficult for them to deal with. The Fountain Guard, though, and the Numlothian Honor Guard Lothlorien, I should say, have an answer for that. Also, there's that Dragon's Breath cannon, so Corrigan and the Runic forces really assisting Lothlorien here. Lothlorien, and they did hold back an awful lot in reserve, Lothlorien, and this is where that could start to bear fruit. Because Lyndon and Imladris are so depleted that Lothlorien should be fairly comfortable about having to deal with them. The Noldorin units are just here. You can see there the Warg Riders coming over to support, but immediately being sent packing by the Kindred of Celeborn. And in terms of quality here, units like the Militia on the front line are going to get dumpstered by the Lorenar Axemen. Gondor are going to have to rely on their phalanx to do most of the heavy lifting here for them. Watchers of the Goldenwood are here. The problem they do have, of course, Lothlorien, is the fact they just don't have the numbers here. Oof. Right through the Fountain Guard. I mean, this is risky, because they could hit their own men here, Rune. In trying to hit Gondor, they could hit Lothlorien. Split shot arrows continuing to do their thing. There's still some some Mordor forces over here as well. The Temple Guard. Not the easiest thing to deal with in melee. Wardens of Elos Tyrion are moving forward. Gondor cavalry are over there. There goes a general. I would imagine that's the Linden one. I think Linden... Well, there goes Mirkwood. I think Linden probably moved in a little too soon. They probably should have waited for what little Imladris support they were going to get. But I guess Gondor were moving in. And, you know, you can't really hang Gondor out to dry. They needed some pressure from another angle, so Lothlorien couldn't just focus Gondor down. So in spite of their victories, hard-fought victories won by the red team, all of this... oh, and here you can see the Silverthorn arrows. The Gondor Spearmen is going after the Dragon's Breath cannon, and they have succeeded in getting to them. But they are taking shots in the back from the Silverthorns. I'm not sure what Isengard are going to be able to do here against Rune, as Rune continue to just whittle them down from afar. I think Isengard, by the looks of things, they're doing the right thing. They're sending their melee forces over towards Lothlorien, because they can't afford to just sit here with this many resources tied up. This sort of warfare is the sort of thing which Rune are more set up to deal with here than Isengard. Uruk-hai team moving in, although Rune are actually now moving forward. This might be... It's a historic day. This is the first time I've seen Corrigan move towards the enemy. Madness. It truly is a new dawn. But that is the right thing for Rune to do. If Isengard are intent on moving over here, Rune should put the pressure on Isengard, because even in melee with all their AP, they have a pretty distinct advantage. The pikes are the only thing they really need to worry about. And possibly the Nazkai, but I mean, in the late game it will probably be more beneficial to have a unit of Cummel's Dragon Knights than it would be to have Nazkai. A unit of fresh Knights in the late game could be exactly what gives the blue team the advantage here. Lothlorien, meanwhile, are doing a really good number on Gondor. And again, part of this is just the fact that Lothlorien's army butchered the Gondorians on the approach with those archers, but also Gondor had to send over reinforcements throughout the game to bail the elves out on the other side, which succeeded, but at what cost? Well, the cost is the capitulation of the Gondorian army. Lothlorien were simply too strong, and that is most unfortunate. So I think the balance of power certainly has shifted towards the blue team here, because Lothlorien, that was a poor defeat for Gondor there, but not a surprising one by any means. Like, it was a situation where Lothlorien had the advantages, and you would have expected an elven force like that to win. Some Gondorian civilians, some Lorenan spearmen did chase too far though, and what's left of Imladris will be able to pick them off, but I don't think Imladris' army is big enough at this point to worry Lothlorien too much, which of course means that the red team's best hope for winning this fight is going to be to try and dismantle Rune as best they can. Now the Flagrim have moved forward, and they are getting somewhat surrounded here by the Uruk-hai infantry, and unfortunately for them as well, reinforcements are not close enough by, so Corrigan, he kind of aggressive, but not really sort of going all in on that, because I think, you know, the presence of the Gamp Brim on the front line would mean that Isengard would be folding already. As it is, the red team potentially have a way back into this fight. If Isengard can make Rune pay for this only partial advance, as well as, of course, those crossbows getting into a nasty position, which is probably why Corrigan is not moving forward. Like, those crossbows are in a nasty position indeed. But, I mean, if you want to be aggressive in this situation, you can put pressure on the side of the Isengard front line as well. The Golden Boys, though, struggling, and now with the pikes on the front line and no phalanx units of their own, Rune are going to be handed a fairly solid defeat here. Nothing too decisive, but still, it's exactly what the red team needed to give themselves some hope going into the rest of this fight. Lorenan archers moving forward. Obviously, you know, Lorien still with a lot of quality left alive. Lorenan axemen coming in, so now they're going to move forward and they're going to swallow what's left of Imladris whole. I'm not sure how much damage Imladris will be able to do. I would assume that was what was left of Linden, perhaps, or maybe Gondor. Oh, excuse me. These Eldarenway archers, probably the most healthy unit that Imladris have left, but they too are going to be utterly overwhelmed. Any kills they get, I'm sure, will be greatly appreciated by Isengard, because it's going to be all on Isengard to see if they can win this fight. But it's going to be a very tough task for them to do that. And there goes the Imladris general. Slowly but surely, this battle is taking shape. Whatever happens to the Isengard ballista? I did notice it was firing away at one point. I don't know where it went. Ah, there it is. So it is still alive. And to be fair, well, actually, there's the general. The Melkor is chosen. The Snaga skirmishers throwing their jabbies in. Isengard, I think their best hope, though, they do need to conserve some of their ammunition from something. Because they're going to need some sort of range presence to pepper down Lothlorien as they approach. What are they going after? Some Baltroth tribesmen over there. Follow some Watchers of the Golden Wood. Eastron crossbowmen moving around to over here as well. Ah, that's what they're going for. They're going after the Dragon's Breath. And that was a devastating hit as well. Again, the Dragon's Breath is maybe a little bit overtuned at the moment, but it is getting slightly toned down whenever the hotfix comes out. Much like, ironically, how the Isengard Ballista in .96 was incredibly powerful, it's been toned down slightly to the point where it is still significantly stronger than standard Ballistae and also catapults. But it is now a much more reasonable thing on the battlefield rather than the all-conquering force that it was previously. There goes the Mordor general finally. Shanked by Snaga. But the runic front line is really not doing very well at all here, which is not terribly surprising. Now they're broken and fighting to the death, so Corrigan is going to reorganise his force. Corrigan doesn't need to be aggressive anymore. Just keep the Gamfrim in place, make sure that Isengarders sort of still have to maintain their position, and wait for the Lorien forces to finish playing with their food over here. Actually, they're leaving Imladris alive. They need to finish off these Eldarenway archers. Leave not a single high elf left standing. What are they keeping over here? Elder Council? I mean... Well, yeah, the Eldarenway archers are depleted enough at this point that it doesn't really matter. Celeborn? And the Loren-armed archers moving across, and unfortunately for Isengard, it does look as though they still have ammunition, which is a real problem for them, because if Isengard were going to go on to win this fight, they would have needed to have their crossbows be the MVPs. Because, I mean, to be fair, Lorien now, having gone through Gondor and the remnants of both High Elven factions, Lorien aren't looking terribly healthy. I mean, they're still, you know, you would still hope to have done more damage to them than this, but, you know, depleted enough to where, you know, the battle isn't completely over yet, but I would say that the blue team, they really should be going on to win this fight. It's going to be very, very difficult for Katunka to go on to win this fight. Temple Guard, meanwhile, in here trying to deal with the Ballista crew. Only two of them left, however, and unfortunately for them, the Nazkai were still over here, so the Temple Guard, almost as quickly as they arrived, absolutely slaughtered, and what's left of Mordor is now gone. So Isengard, I think they're throwing caution to the wind here. I think they realise they need to do something, otherwise they're just going to be boxed in. So while Lorien is still far enough away to the point they have an opportunity, they're going to throw most of what they can at Rune and try to kill Rune before Lothlorien arrive, and then hopefully with whatever's left, try and put up some sort of fight against the Sylvan Elves. But we shall see. Burning Watchtower over here. I think the Isengard Ballista, see what they do. You can see that Corrigan is moving around to the side here, so they will be able to get some potentially shots right along the Isengard line with they've got their blades out, so maybe not with them, but certainly with the crossbows and the javelins, that's something which is of real concern. I mean, Isengard have moved their way over here now, so they kind of need to commit to what they've already done. The Carmel's Dragonites are over here. Yeah, it's really, really tough this for Isengard, but at the very least, going out by being aggressive is probably the way to go here. Well, there are still Warns of Alos Tyrion, so Lyndon are technically still alive, if only just. And they do still have some ammunition, but 12 rangers, like the DPS they can do, is just not going to be enough, I don't think. In comes the Uruk-hai infantry. But the Gamfrim, if they get into a tighter formation, there goes, friendly fire, unfortunate. They need to get into tight formation and get their phalanx set up. I mean, you know, Rune, to be fair, other than the ill-fated advance, this is where Corrigan is most at home. Sitting in a nice static defensive position and letting the enemy wear themselves down upon his lines. And to be fair to Katunka, there really isn't much he can do at this point to try and stop that. Isengard, Ballista crew and the Nazkai fighting away now, but they are going to be overwhelmed, I think. Not so much by the Axemen and Spearmen, but the Watchers of the Golden Wood will be able to go toe-to-toe with the Nazkai, and then with all the other numbers they've got over here, this pocket of Isengard resistance should be dealt with. Baltroth tries and firing away, Loren-armed archers, yeah, and here we can see the split shots now coming in. Absolutely tearing through these Uruk-hai crossbowmen and pikemen. Katunka rather feeling like a rat caught in a trap, I'm sure. Here are the Eastron crossbows as well. Taking a lot of damage from something. What would that be? Is that the Wardens of Alos Tyrion? No, it can't be. Probably the crossbows, actually, but even so, forward come the Snaga skirmishes. Oof, look at those split shots. That's why the Kindred of Caliborn are my favourite unit in .97. They're just so... They've got such a presence on the field. Like, technically speaking, this is a situation in which Rangers would be better, but it just looks so much nicer from the Kindred of Caliborn. Also, it doesn't massacre my frames, which is always nice. In comes some Baltroth Trisons to the front line. Gamprim, probably outmatched actually on this front line now from Isengard, but Runes still have manpower to spare. I mean, you can see here that Isengard just being kept in place by the Gamprim and the crossbows doing their things. Ironically enough, though, the Dragon Knights won't be able to recharge this section of line because the stakes are perfectly positioned to actually defend the Isengard infantry. But there are more Isengard forces that are horribly exposed out there, which the Runic Knights can go into. And the Scion Rim can be the ones to recharge these lines anyway. How are Isengard getting along over here? Poorly, I would imagine, because they didn't have much left to actually defend. The crossbows are being asked to try and deal with the heavy Elven archers in melee, which is never a good sign. And you can see over here the Dragon Knights hoovering up the exposed units. And there you can see the Nazkai, as strong as they may be, no match for all of these units over here. The Elder Runway Archers, though, were left alone. Lorien did leave them alive, so M1 Breakout is still just about alive. There goes the Isengard General, skewered by one of the Elder Councils. Gwaithir Myrdain. Is that the end of Isengard? No. It must be the end of Linden instead. Yep, their Wardens of Alos Tyrion were caught by the Scion Rim. In come the Kindred of Caliborn. They've used up all their ammunition, but now they're getting into melee with those two Elven Blades. And Isengard's hopes have well and truly fallen apart. Snaga Skirmish is being routed by the Carmel's Dragon Knights. Uruk-hai Pikemen being routed. So the real question is, I mean, yeah, like, the Isengard army is almost completely routing now, which technically means Imladris, despite being the ones that were very aggressively pushed onto in the opening phases of the fight, are the last red team army left standing. I'm not sure whether you can call 13 Elder Runway archers an army. Well, actually no, the Nazkai are still over here, and there's still 15 of them, so yeah. Isengard will be the last red team army left standing. Fortunately for Katunka, there goes the rest of those forces, completely surrounded by the Scion Rim. And I have to say, the conservation of force from Rune and Lothlorien, how strong their armies still were in the late game, was important. Because Isengard just didn't have the strength to deal with them both. I think he could have dealt with one. If it was just him and Rune left at the end, I think Isengard could have dealt with that. But with all of these forces from Lothlorien, it was always going to be very, very unlikely that they would have been able to carry that through. Defeat is a distinct possibility for them. Elder Runway Archer is going to be destroyed. And so the final fight over here. Well, actually no, the Nazkai, the Isengard player, admitted defeat, so Imladris were the last army left standing. M1 Breakout here. The Watchers of the Golden Wood going to finish them off, and there they go. A really competitive fight though, and I think honestly the blue team's success can be traced back, in spite of the fact that they did ultimately go on to lose, to Mirkwood's push. You know, like Steward of Dale, it wasn't a glamorous job to charge in and die as it was. I'm sure that he wanted to wipe Imladris from the field, but in the end, even if he didn't get what he wanted, he still did a valuable job for his team, because that aggression meant that Imladris needed support from both Linden and Gondor, and they sent it across, and ultimately they were just about able to win that fight. But then they had to go on to deal with almost fully fresh Lothlorien and Rune armies, which was always going to be a really, really uphill struggle. And the Gondorians, I think they needed their full infantry force to charge in and envelop Lothlorien as they wanted. As it was, the Lothlorien archers absolutely obliterated the slightly understrength Gondorian infantry at that point. And also the Dragon's Breath certainly didn't help matters for Gondor, ripping through the Fountain Guard like it did. But yeah, I think that deserves a lot of credit. I think Mordor as well, they got a lot of kills, and their army, I still feel as though their army was it was a difficult task for Mordor to really get the most out of that army against Linden, especially considering the fact that Mordor had to be aggressive as well to sort of keep parity with their Mirkwood allies. Getting into melee with that many quality High Elven units was always going to be difficult, and yet they managed to pull it off, albeit with support, of course. Like, I think the the Lothlorien player sending over some archers just to help out against Linden, obviously that was going to be devastating for Linden. Lothlorien, best archers in the game really, especially with those Silverthorns getting right along the line, and Linden one of the most, if not the most, vulnerable factions to archers overall with their very low armour values. But yeah, I think a well-deserved victory here from the blue team. I think that it was actually very good from both teams though, because I would say the red team, they definitely saw the danger of what Mirkwood were doing early, and they did send over support to help their ally, which I'm always glad to see. Like, one of the things that really irks me is when sort of team members essentially leave their allies to die with no forethought for what comes after that. Like, those units that, you know, essentially are massacring your ally are going to come over for you eventually, so it's in your best interest to help your allies. And of course, in this situation they did, but in the end, Mirkwood forced them to commit, I think, more than they wanted, and Mordor as well. And that obviously opened the door for Lothlorien and Rune to win in the late game. Like, there wasn't much that Katunka could have done in the late game, I don't think, to actually turn that fight around. But let's see what did the damage from Mirkwood. They were one of the first to actually fall in this particular battle, but they definitely did their job. The Elder Council did very well. The Wardens of Amon-Lank did very well. Not too surprising, of course, that extra AP coming in handy against the more heavily armoured High Elves. And the Ents also doing very well as well, before they were eventually shut down pretty hard by the Gwaithir Myrdain and the Elder Emway Swordmasters, as you would expect. The rest of the army, mixed bag, it must be said. Like, the infantry of Imladris was very strong, and Mirkwood willingly charged into them very bravely, so it was always going to be interesting to see that happen. But yeah, big thank you to the Steward of Dale. This was a very interesting match to behold on a map that I do actually rather like, the Borderlands. It's one of those maps which was developed alongside the Conquest mode, and it's multifaceted like most of the maps that came from that. You know, there's more going on than just a flat field, and there's also more going on than just a series of choke points. There's a good mix of all types of warfare, which means that multiple types of armies can be viable, which I think is important for a map like this to be interesting to watch. So yeah, big thank you to the Steward of Dale and all the players involved. Like, I don't think anyone played overly badly, to be honest with you. I think this was a good map for anyone. I just think that ultimately the tactics and the compositions of the blue team were just slightly more useful than the red team. But yeah, big thank you to all the players. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.